Hi there. Selection for a special operations unit has been described in many previous books which I've reviewed here. For example, Andy McNabb described in detail the selection process for 22 SAS in his book Immediate Action. It was virtually a day-by-day account. Harry McCallion in the Killing Zone described going through the selection for the South African recce's. Then he also took selection for 22 SAS. He did the winter selection. So he describes and compares the two. Paul French, in his book, To the Edge, describes in detail from personal experience the selection processes of the British SAS, the Rhodesian SAS and the Selous Scouts, and compares how each of those courses was run and what they were designed to produce as the end result. The arduous selection process, FASTBAIT, for the South African Police Special Task Force is covered in the book called Special Task Force by Shane Willard, which I've reviewed. It's a superb book, and that gives the insight on a law enforcement based selection process, which is nevertheless very much a top level unit. Spike Ho, in his book Keystone of 22 SAS, which covers the history of the selection process by describing how Colonel Woodhouse, who's the subject of the book, it's a biography of him, at the time the SAS was out in Malaya in the jungle, and he had come back to the UK to recover from malaria, and while back here he took the guys who were waiting to go out to Malaya, which was called the H&D Holding and Draft Company, and they'd been having problems because guys were just sent out from the UK and they put them through the jungle phase and they weren't suitable. So the idea was to do a selection phase in the UK, and he took them to the Brecon Beacons, to the camp there, and put them through a series of tests on the mountains, which were the basis for selection ever since. Unknown distances, you don't know how far you've gone, you don't know how far you've yet to go, no encouragement from the DS, pitting yourself against the terrain and against the climate, and very much a solo effort. And that formed the backbone as a very, very clever way of ascertaining the qualities required, because taking the guys on the mountains may seem related to mountain training, but it wasn't. At the time the SAS was out in the jungle. What Colonel Woodhouse understood was training on severe terrain produces the depth of character, or exposes the depth of character that's required. It's to be noted that as soon as he recovered from malaria, he submitted himself to selection, went through it and passed. One of the guys who worked on training wing of 22 SAS once said to me that the whole aim of selection is to get the guys cold, wet, tired and hungry, and then start putting them through arduous tasks to see what they're made of. That's really you can sum up selection that way. So the New Zealand SAS and the Australian SAS, although geographically distant from the UK, nevertheless are part of the same family, and they have very, very strict selection standards themselves, and their illustrious history operationally, particularly out in the Far East, shows that the selection process has worked to produce remarkable soldiers. So Keith Fennell has written a book entirely about the selection process for the Australian SAS. So it's this book, Warrior Training, and I think it's the only book dedicated solely to the selection process. So he joined the army in 1994, went through infantry training, and then when he joined the army, he had his eye on parachuting, but within a short time, less than a year, he applied for SAS selection. So he starts preparing, him and another chap who in the same unit who were going for selection, by loading up Bergens and doing tabs up the mountains around Canberra. So then the book details the whole process. So they go out to the selection area, and the first week is really just to dispose of passengers, to see who really wants to be there. And 150 guys start, and one of the first things they do is a swim test, 300-meter swim test, plus 25 meters underwater. And he noticed there's a guy on the course, Jay, who's a corporal, who has been pointed out to him as being the most likely to pass the course, hard as nails, impressive physical, very taciturn, doesn't speak to anyone, and you know, head down, determined. Unfortunately, and this does seem to happen on lots of selection courses, he doesn't make it past the first run. And you know, the guys, in fact 22 SAS used to give you a handout, and it says, don't be impressed by the physique of the guys who are bound to pass the course. When you have to carry their Bergen for them to the final RV, it becomes a bit of a disappointment to you. Another, and pretty unique to the Australian SAS, is a kit examination, where they have to display all the kit that they bring. They strip naked, put all the kit and clothing in front of them, and then it's examined, and they have to hold up various pieces of kit, but it's done in such a way that it messes with their mind, and it can go on for hours. There's another unit that used to give you a kit list, which was very, very detailed, even down to what coins you had to have on your possession. And when you turned up through the front gate of the training establishment, they checked, and if you deviated in any way from the kit list, you just turn around and went back out. The theory being that if you can't even read a kit list, you shouldn't be in a special unit. At the prior to the course, Keith Fennell had rolled his ankle, so he was motoring with a damaged ankle, and however, it didn't deter him, and it didn't slow him down. Day 7 was a 36-hour solo nav exercise, which kind of put the stamp on the end of that phase. After that, only 50 remained, which then they progressed on to week 3 eventually, which is called Exercise Lucky Dip, part of which is a 4.5-day mountain endurance test with all sorts of things, load carries, extra tasks and so on thrown in, a lot of surprise stuff, and it really signifies the end of the initial selection process. From there on he passes, and from there on he's into what's called the SAS reinforcement cycle, which in the UK is called continuation. So this goes into things like parachuting, signals, survival, that kind of thing. It's a long process before you can take your place within one of the operational troops. So the book goes into that in full detail. I won't cover it all. Then some of his activities after leaving the Special Forces. He has written another book on his operational life, and I will eventually review that as well. But the Australian SAS certainly is right up there as one of the world's top special force units, and this look at their selection process is certainly an eye-opener.